All right, let's dive right in to another deep dive today.
Yeah, sounds
We're
good.
going to be talking about Bishop Mariann Budde,
Oh, yeah.
her sermon
Interesting.
at Trump's second inaugural prayer service back in 2025.
It definitely got people talking, that's for sure.
Yeah, it really sparked a lot of debate.
And for good reason, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why we're here today, to really kind of break this down.
Yeah.
We've got some excerpts from articles on Baptist News, Global, and Democracy Now.
Mm-hmm.
We're also going to take a look at Budde's Wikipedia entry
Okay.
and really trying to unpack this.
Yeah.
You know, religion and politics are always kind of
Intertwined.
yeah, but this one felt different.
Yeah, it really did.
So let's figure out what exactly happened, why her words were so controversial,
Okay.
and what this all means about faith in America today.
Sounds good.
So
Mm-hmm.
to set the stage,
Yeah.
this interfaith service, it was held at Washington National Cathedral
Right.
the day after the inauguration,
Mm-hmm.
January 21st, 2025.
Big day.
Big day, yeah.
And it's actually a tradition that goes all the way back to 1933.
So this wasn't like some radical departure from the norm.
No, not in terms of the service itself,
Right.
but the content of Bud's sermon. Oh, that certainly, that shook things up a bit.
All right, so let's talk about Bud.
Okay.
First female Bishop of Washington,
Right.
elected back in 2011. And she had already criticized Trump publicly before that.
Yeah, she had, notably for that photo op at St. John's Church
Oh, right.
during the George Floyd protests.
Right, yeah.
That incident, I think, really foreshadowed the tension that would kind of come to a head with this sermon.
So she wasn't shying away from controversy.
Not at all.
Okay, so at this inaugural prayer service,
Yeah.
her sermon, it starts with a call for national unity,
Uh-huh.
but it quickly went beyond just kind of feel-good platitudes.
Right. So how so?
Well, she urged unity, yes,
Yeah.
but a unity that encompasses and respects our differences.
Mm.
She put it.
And she called for sacrificial love.
Ooh, that's a loaded phrase, especially in the context of like such a politically charged event.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's where the contrast between her message and the kind of prevailing political climate
Yeah.
comes really, really stark.
I know.
She was basically challenging the very notion of what unity means
Right.
in a divided society like ours.
So she wasn't just saying like, hey, everyone, can we all just get along?
No, no.
Okay.
She was pushing for something much deeper, much more challenging,
Something more uncomfortable.
much more uncomfortable. Yeah.
Okay. And remember, this was just hours
Yeah.
after Trump had signed those executive orders
Right.
that a lot of people, including Abu, considered discriminatory.
Mm-hmm.
So this wasn't some like abstract theological debate. This
Yeah.
was about real world policies and their impact
Exactly.
on people's lives.
100%.
And that leads to her next move, which is really significant.
Yeah.
She makes a direct plea to Trump. She says, "In the name of our God, I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now."
Wow.
Pretty bold,
Very bold.
considering the audience.
Yeah.
She's not holding back.
No, she's not. And then she goes on to mention LGBTQ plus individuals and immigrants,
Okay.
many of whom she points out are very active members
Yeah.
of various faith communities.
I'm seeing a theme here.
Okay.
It seems like she's intentionally centering the voices of those who are often marginalized or excluded from these types of conversations.
That's a very astute observation.
Think.
And it's this centering of marginalized voices that made her sermon so controversial,
Right.
particularly for those who supported Trump's policies.
Because it challenges this idea of like a homogenous Christian America.
Yes.
She's highlighting the diversity of faiths and experiences within the country.
Exactly. And that's a message that, well, some people just weren't ready to hear.
So let's talk about the reactions.
Okay.
Trump himself, he wasn't thrilled.
No, he wasn't. No. He dismissed the service as not too exciting and said they could do much better. Later on Truth Social, he called Bud a radical left hardline Trump hater and criticized her tone.
Pretty dismissive.
It is.
And it wasn't just Trump, right?
Yeah.
Other prominent figures kind of piled on.
Yeah, Republican Congressman Mike Collins even suggested that she should be deported,
What?
despite her being a U.S. citizen.
Oh.
It really shows how quickly any criticism of Trump, especially coming from a religious figure, was just labeled as unpatriotic or even, you know, treasonous.
So it immediately became an us versus them situation.
Yeah.
With Bud being cast as like the enemy.
Exactly. Classic example of how political discourse just shuts down any possibility of nuance or dialogue.
So were there any voices of support for Bud?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Bernice King,
Oh.
daughter of Martin Luther King Jr., voiced her support.
Okay.
As did Austin Ivory, who's a biographer of Pope Francis.
So it wasn't a universally negative response.
No.
It seems like her words really resonated with some people.
They did, yeah. Particularly those who shared her concerns about social justice.
Right.
And the role of faith in challenging power structures.
Okay, so we set the scene, we've laid out the basic facts.
Right.
But now I'm curious to hear your analysis of this.
Okay.
What does this whole incident, what does it reveal about the state of political discourse in the U.S.?
Well, I think what's really striking is how quickly a message of unity delivered in a setting that's traditionally been seen as unifying, how quickly it becomes so divisive. It really speaks to, I think, a fundamental breakdown in our ability to even listen to, let alone engage with perspectives that challenge our own worldview.
It's not even about disagreeing on policies at this point.
No.
It's about this deeper inability to acknowledge the other side's experience as valid.
Exactly.
And that seems dangerous.
Very dangerous.
Because it shuts down any possibility of real dialogue or compromise.
Yeah. And what about the role of religion in all of this?
Yeah, good point. Because it seems like Budde's sermon tapped into like a deeper tension within religious communities themselves.
Absolutely. Religious communities, they're not monolithic.
Right.
We're seeing these growing divides within denominations on issues like social justice, LGBTQ plus rights, the role of government.
Right.
Budde represents a more progressive wing of the Episcopal Church, which has often been at odds with more conservative factions, both within the denomination and outside of it.
So even within the world of faith, there's no easy answer to these questions.
Not at all. And that's why I think this incident is so fascinating. It forces us to confront the complexity of these issues, to recognize the diversity of perspectives, and to resist this urge to oversimplify or demonize those who hold different views.
It's not just a political debate.
No, it's not.
It's also like a theological and philosophical one as well.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to delve into even further in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good.
We're going to explore the historical context, the theological arguments, what this all means for the future of faith in American life.
I'm intrigued already.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
We'll be right back to continue this conversation. So Budde's sermon, it really ignited like a firestorm.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But to understand why it was so controversial, I think we have to go a little deeper.
Deeper into the history.
Yeah, like the historical and theological context.
You're right. It's not just about like one sermon or one event.
Yeah.
This is about a much bigger struggle over the role of faith.
Right.
In American public life, it's been going on for centuries.
So where do we even begin to unpack all of that?
Well, a good starting point might be this concept of Christian nationalism.
Okay, I've heard that term thrown around.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure I totally understand what it means.
So basically, Christian nationalism is this belief that America is, or should be, a nation explicitly founded on Christian principles.
Okay.
And that these principles should be reflected in our laws and governance.
So it's not just about being a Christian nation.
Right.
Like demographically.
Right.
It's about like having a specific set of Christian values enshrined in our political system.
Exactly.
Okay.
And for people who support this idea of Christian nationalism, Budde's message is a direct threat.
Really?
To their vision of America.
Okay, how so?
Well, her emphasis on inclusivity and her willingness to challenge a political leader on moral grounds, those ideas run counter to their belief in a unified Christian identity, which is often linked with conservative political ideology.
So she's disrupting like this narrative that they've constructed about what it means to be both Christian and American.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that not all Christians or even all Episcopalians subscribe to this view.
Right, of course.
There are a lot of people of faith who see Budde's message as a faithful embodiment of the gospel's call for love, compassion, and justice.
So it's really like a clash of interpretations.
Yes.
Both of Scripture and of American history.
You put it perfectly.
And this clash, it's not new, is it?
No, it's been simmering under the surface of American society for generations.
But it seems like it's intensified recently.
It really has.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's fueled in part by the rise of social media.
Of course.
And the increasing polarization of our political discourse.
Right, like everything is amplified now.
Everything is amplified.
Every disagreement becomes this huge battle.
Exactly. And that makes it so much harder to have nuanced conversations about complex issues.
Which brings us back to Budde's sermon and all the reactions.
Right. And it's important to remember the response wasn't monolithic.
Right. There was a lot of condemnation.
Oh, there was a lot.
Particularly from, like, conservative media outlets.
Yeah,
But there were also those voices of support.
Oh, yeah. People who saw her message as this necessary challenge to the status quo.
You mentioned Bernice King and Austin Iver before.
I did.
Were there others who spoke out in support of her?
Yeah. A number of religious leaders, academics, and activists also expressed their solidarity.
Okay.
With Budde, they praised her courage and her commitment to speaking truth to power.
So it wasn't this, like, universal negative response?
No, not at all.
There was actually a significant amount of people who agreed with what she was saying.
There were, and I think it's important to highlight that diversity of response because it reflects this broader diversity of perspectives within religious and political communities.
So it wasn't just this simple left versus right divide?
No, not at all. There were nuances, complexities within each camp.
Okay, like what?
Well, some conservatives might have agreed with her call for unity, but disagreed with her critique of specific policies.
Right.
And some progressives may have supported her message overall, but felt she didn't go far enough in her challenge to Trump.
It's easy to get caught up in that binary us versus them thinking. But reality is so much more complicated.
Always.
Okay, so that's a great point, I think.
Thank you.
What's one of the biggest takeaways from all of this?
I think one of the most important is the need to resist the urge to oversimplify these issues.
Right.
To recognize that there's a diversity of perspectives.
Yeah.
And to engage with each other's arguments in good faith, even when we fundamentally disagree.
Easier said than done.
Much easier said than done.
Right, especially now.
It's definitely a challenge, but I think it's a challenge worth taking on.
Why is that?
Because the alternative, retreating into our echo chambers and demonizing those who hold different views, that's ultimately destructive to our individual well-being and the health of our democracy.
Okay, so we've talked about the historical context, the theological debates, the diversity of reactions.
Right.
But what are, like, the lasting implications of this whole Budde-Trump showdown?
Okay.
Like, what does this tell us about the future of religion and politics in America?
Well, I think it's a clear sign that these issues aren't going away anytime soon. As political and social divides deepen and as religious identities become even more intertwined, with political affiliations, we're likely to see more clashes like this.
So buckle up, because it's only going to get more intense.
In a sense, yes, but there's also another side to this.
Okay.
Budde's sermon and the reactions it caused show the power of faith.
Okay.
To challenge the status quo, to speak truth to power, and to inspire people to work for a more just and compassionate world.
So it's not all doom and gloom.
Not at all. In fact, I think this incident offers us a glimmer of hope. It shows that even in a society that is deeply divided, there are still people willing to stand up for what they believe in, to risk criticism and backlash to speak their truth. And that's worth celebrating.
That's a much more optimistic take than I was expecting.
I try to be both a realist and an optimist, and I think there's room for both. In this situation, it's going to be a bumpy ride. But ultimately, I believe hope, compassion, and a commitment to dialogue will prevail.
I like that outlook.
Thank you.
But, you know, I also want to be realistic about the challenges that we face.
Yeah, of course.
You said earlier that Budde's sermon challenged the very notion of what unity means in a divided society.
And I think that's a key point to unpack.
Okay.
We often talk about unity as if it's this, like, simple, straightforward concept.
Easy.
But in reality, it's much more complex. True unity doesn't mean erasing our differences or pretending we all agree on everything.
Right.
It means acknowledging and respecting those differences while also finding some common ground and working together towards shared goals.
So it's not about uniformity.
No.
It's about finding a way to coexist. And collaborate. Even though we disagree.
Precisely. And that requires a willingness to listen to each other, to empathize with each other's experiences. And to seek understanding, even when it's difficult.
Which brings us back to that question of how we have these conversations. Without it becoming a shouting match or retreating into our echo chambers.
Exactly. Any advice on that front?
Yeah. How do we do that?
Well, I think the first step is to recognize that these conversations are going to be messy.
Okay.
Uncomfortable. We're not going to agree on everything, and that's okay.
Okay, so embrace the discomfort.
In a sense, yes, but also approach these conversations with humility.
Okay.
And a willingness to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Be curious about the other person's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Ask questions.
Right.
Listen actively, and most importantly, try to understand where they're coming from, even if you don't agree with their conclusions.
This sounds like a tall order.
It is, especially in today's environment.
Right.
But I believe it's possible and it's essential. If we want to move forward as a society, we can't just shout each other down or retreat into our own tribes.
So how do we bridge that divide?
We have to find a way to build bridges of understanding and empathy.
I agree, but how do we do that, like practically speaking?
Well, it starts with small steps.
Okay.
It might be having a tough conversation with a family member or a friend who holds different political or religious views. It might be reading a book or watching a documentary that challenges your perspective.
Okay.
Maybe volunteering in your community or supporting organizations that promote dialogue and understanding.
So it's about actively seeking out those opportunities to engage with different perspectives.
Yes.
And to challenge our own assumptions.
Exactly. And it's about doing so with an open mind and a willingness to learn. We're not going to change the world overnight.
Right.
But we can start by changing ourselves.
Okay.
By becoming more informed, more empathetic, and more engaged citizens.
That's a powerful message. It makes me think about the role of education.
Yeah.
In all this, if we want to foster a more tolerant and understanding society,
Yes.
we need to start early. Right.
We do. Education is key.
Okay.
We need to teach young people how to think critically, how to evaluate information, how to engage in respectful dialogue, how to appreciate the value of diversity and different perspectives.
So it's not just about teaching facts.
Yeah.
It's about teaching critical thinking skills.
Yes.
And fostering empathy.
Precisely. And it's about creating a learning environment where students feel safe to ask questions.
Right.
To challenge assumptions, to explore different viewpoints without fear of judgment or reprisal.
That sounds like a very different kind of education than a lot of us experienced.
It is, and it's going to require a fundamental shift in our approach to teaching and learning. But I think it's a shift that's necessary if we want to equip future generations with the tools they need to navigate this complex and rapidly changing world.
We've covered a lot of ground in this conversation.
We have.
Delved into the history, the theology,
the politics,
the social dynamics.
It's a lot.
It is a lot to process.
It is, and it's important to remember that this is just a starting point.
Right.
There's so much more to explore, to learn.
Let's try to distill some key takeaways for our listeners.
Okay.
What are the big things we want them to walk away with today?
I think first and foremost, it's important to understand that this relationship between religion and politics in America is complicated, multifaceted. There's no easy answer to this question of what role faith should play in public life. There's a wide range of perspectives.
So resist the urge to oversimplify.
Exactly. There's no single Christian perspective on this issue or any other issue for that matter.
Okay.
There's a diversity of thought within these communities.
And that diversity is something to be celebrated.
It is.
Not feared.
Absolutely. It's what makes America so dynamic and interesting.
Yeah.
But it also makes it more challenging to navigate these complex issues.
Because there's no easy answer.
Right. There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
So what's the answer? How do we move forward in a way that respects everyone's beliefs and values?
That's a great question. I don't think there's one single answer, but I do think there are some principles that can help guide us.
What?
Principles like empathy, respect, humility, and a willingness to listen and learn from each other.
Those sound like really good starting points.
They are.
But how do we put those principles into practice?
Yeah.
How do we move beyond the abstract and into the realm of like concrete action?
Well, I think it starts with individual choices.
Uh-huh.
You can choose to engage in respectful dialogue even when it's tough.
Right.
You can seek out information and perspectives that challenge your assumptions. You can support organizations that promote understanding and bridge divides.
Okay.
And you can choose to raise your voice against injustice and bigotry whenever and wherever you see it.
So it's about taking personal responsibility for creating a more just and compassionate world.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in shaping the kind of society we want to live in.
Right.
And it's about understanding that even small actions can make a difference.
That's powerful. And it makes me think about something else Bud said.
Yeah.
She called out fear as a problem.
She did.
In her sermon.
Yeah.
How does that connect to her larger message?
That's a great question. Fear is powerful.
It is.
And it can easily be manipulated to divide and control.
Oh, yeah.
When we're afraid, we're more likely to see people who are different from us as threats.
Right.
To cling to our own tribe and to support policies that promise security, even at the expense of others.
So overcoming fear is essential to building a more just and compassionate society.
It is absolutely. We need to resist that temptation to give in to fear.
Yeah.
To recognize the ways that it's used to manipulate us and choose compassion and understanding over division and hatred.
And that's a challenge for all of us.
It is.
Not just people in positions of power.
Yeah, we all have to choose hope over fear every day.
That's a great point, and a perfect note to end this part of our deep dive on. We'll be right back after a short break to wrap things up and leave you with some final thoughts to ponder. So we've really explored a lot here.
Yeah, the background, the reactions, the deeper implications of Bishop Budde's sermon.
Yeah, it's clear that this event really touched on some fundamental questions.
It did, about faith, politics, American identity, really big topics.
Absolutely. What I find fascinating, though, is how one sermon,
right,
delivered in this, traditionally unifying setting, could become such a flashpoint.
Yeah, it really speaks to the power of words.
Yeah.
Especially when those words challenge deeply held beliefs.
Right.
Or disrupt established power structures, which is what she did.
And her message really seemed to strike a nerve.
Yeah, for sure.
And it exposed these fault lines, not just between political ideologies,
right,
but within religious communities themselves.
Exactly. And her sermon highlighted that tension, between those who see America as a Christian nation with a specific set of values, often aligned with conservative politics, and those who advocate for a more inclusive and pluralistic vision, often associated with more progressive ideals.
And it seems like that tension has been building for a while.
Oh, yeah.
Fueled by social and political polarization.
Absolutely. The rise of Christian nationalism, the influence of social media, the deepening partisan divide, it's all contributed to this climate of heightened sensitivity.
So Budde's sermon was like a catalyst.
Yeah.
It brought all these simmering tensions to the surface.
It did, and it forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths
about
America. We're a deeply divided society. Struggling to find common ground even on the most basic issues.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all the negativity, all the polarization.
It is.
So where do we go from here?
Well, I think it starts with recognizing that unity doesn't have to mean uniformity.
Okay.
We can disagree on policies, on interpretations of Scripture, on our visions for the future, and still strive to coexist peacefully and respectfully.
So it's not about silencing dissent or forcing everyone to conform to a single worldview.
Not at all. True unity lies in embracing our differences, while finding ways to work together towards those shared goals. It requires empathy, humility, and a willingness to listen, to learn from those who hold different perspectives.
That sounds incredibly challenging, especially now.
It is, but it's also essential. We can't allow fear and division to dictate our actions. We have to actively choose hope over fear, understanding over judgment, engagement over apathy.
You mentioned earlier the importance of individual choices.
I did.
So what are some concrete steps that our listeners can take to embody these principles in their own lives?
It can be as simple as just starting a conversation with someone who holds a different view than you. The goal is to understand, not to convert them. It could involve supporting organizations that promote interfaith dialogue or advocate for social justice. Or it could even just mean educating yourself on these complex issues, reading books, listening to podcasts, engaging in thoughtful discussions.
So it's about being proactive.
It is.
About seeking out opportunities to challenge our own assumptions. And expand our understanding.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that even small acts of kindness and understanding can have a ripple effect. We may not be able to single-handedly change the world.
Of course not.
But we can change the world around us, one interaction at a time.
I really like that it reminds me that we all have agency.
Yes.
That we're not just passive bystanders in all of this.
We're not. We all have a role to play in shaping the future. And that role starts with individual choices, with how we interact with each other, with the information we consume, with the values we choose to embody.
So Budde's sermon, while it exposed the deep divisions in our society, it also, maybe unintentionally, offered a roadmap for how to bridge those divides.
I think that's a great way to put it. Her message while controversial, ultimately points toward a vision of unity,
Okay.
grounded in respect, empathy, a commitment to dialogue, whether we agree with her specific views or not.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot we can learn from her willingness to speak truth to power
Yeah.
and to challenge us to live up to our better angels.
Before we wrap up, though, I want to go back to something you said earlier
Yeah.
about the need to resist fear.
Okay.
How do we as individuals overcome that fear?
That so often drives division and conflict.
Yeah, how do we do that?
It's tough, especially in a world that feels so uncertain and volatile, but I think it starts with recognizing that fear is often based on misinformation or just like distorted perceptions.
Okay.
We need to be critical consumers of information, to question our assumptions, and to seek out diverse perspectives.
So being informed and discerning is crucial.
It is, but it's also important to cultivate a sense of inner resilience,
Okay.
to develop practices that help us stay grounded and centered, even amidst all the chaos, you know?
Like what?
This could involve meditation, mindfulness, spending time in nature, connecting with loved ones, engaging in activities that bring us joy and purpose.
So it's not just about changing our external environment.
No.
It's also about cultivating that inner strength and peace.
Exactly. And it's about remembering that we're not alone in this.
Right.
There are so many people out there who share our values, who are working toward a more just and compassionate world. And by connecting with those people, by building communities of support and solidarity, we can amplify our impact and create this powerful force for change.
That's a beautiful thought. And it brings us full circle to Budde's call for unity.
It does.
Not as a suppression of difference, but as a tapestry woven from the threads of our diverse experiences.
Yeah, beautifully put. And ultimately, I think that's a message we want to leave with our listeners.
Yeah.
Yes, we face huge challenges as a nation, as a global community, but we also have this power to choose hope over fear, to build bridges instead of walls, and to create a future where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued.
This has been an incredibly insightful conversation. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I know I've learned a lot. I hope our listeners have too.
Me too. And remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Take these ideas, these questions, these challenges, and continue exploring them.
Right.
Engage with others, seek out new perspectives, and never stop trying to make the world a little bit better.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.